We are going to be imposing a 25% increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America.
Over the weekend, Donald Trump announced a new trade deal with the European Union. It will result in a $90 billion per year tax
On
hike.
Wednesday, the U.S. government enacted a landmark trade policy, imposing a substantial 50% tariff on a wide range of imported copper products. This action, which is set to take effect on August 1st, is a central element of the administration's broader strategy to revitalize American manufacturing and lessen the country's dependence on foreign supply chains. Welcome viewers to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The decision was formally justified on the grounds of national security, with the White House highlighting copper's critical role in sophisticated defense systems, from military aircraft and naval vessels to ammunition and advanced communication networks. This move is not merely an economic decision, it is a strategic declaration aimed at protecting what the administration views as a vital domestic industry. The new tariffs are meticulously targeted, focusing on specific finished and semi-finished copper goods. This includes foundational items like pipes, wires, rods, sheets, and tubes, as well as value-added products such as pipe fittings, cables, and various electrical components. However, in a crucial move that offers a significant reprieve for Canada's mining and refining sector, a number of key raw and semi-processed materials are exempt from these new duties. Notably, copper concentrate, anodes, and cathodes, which are produced in immense volumes by Canadian companies and are essential inputs for U.S. manufacturers, are not subject to the new tariffs for the time being. This exemption also applies to copper scrap. This deliberate exemption is a calculated decision that speaks to the deep interconnectedness of the North American economy. As Pierre Gradin, president of the Mining Association of Canada, pointed out, the U.S. simply doesn't produce enough of these raw materials to satisfy its own industrial demand. Placing tariffs on them would have created a significant cost shock for American manufacturers, undermining the very goal of the policy. By leaving these materials untaxed, the administration shields U.S. companies from immediate financial harm while still targeting foreign finished goods. Gradin described the current impact on his sector as modest and possibly even negligible, a far better outcome than the widespread financial pressure that was initially feared. The U.S. serves as the single largest market for Canadian copper, representing a staggering $4.8 billion, or 52%, of Canada's total metal exports in 2023. Despite the current relief, the long-term outlook for the Canadian copper industry remains clouded by uncertainty. President Trump's proclamation on the tariffs included a clear warning that the current exemptions are not permanent. The administration has initiated a formal review of the U.S. copper market and set a deadline of June 30, 2026, to determine whether to impose additional tariffs. A potential 15% tariff on imported refined copper could be implemented in 2027, with the possibility of it doubling the following year. This looming threat compels Canadian producers to engage in long-term strategic planning, constantly weighing the risk of future trade barriers. The most immediate and direct impact of the new tariffs is being felt by Canadian manufacturers of finished goods, particularly those in the wire and cable sector. These companies are now directly exposed to the 50% duty, which could severely reduce their competitiveness in the U.S. market. While some may attempt to pivot and redirect exports to other international markets, the U.S. remains their most critical customer. According to data from Statistics Canada, wire and cable shipments to the U.S. in 2024 totaled nearly $705 million, accounting for a dominant 85% of all exports for those products. Any significant reduction in U.S. demand could force these manufacturers to scale back production, leading to a downstream effect that reduces demand for the raw materials supplied by Canadian mining companies. This tariff announcement must be viewed within the larger framework of ongoing trade tensions between the U.S. and Canada. The action comes as both nations are in the final stages of a complex negotiation for a new trade agreement. President Trump has frequently used the threat of tariffs as a lever to push for concessions, and the new copper duties are a powerful reminder of this strategy. The tariffs are the culmination of a Section 232 investigation into copper imports, which concluded that foreign competitors' predatory practices and excessive environmental regulations have systematically harmed the American copper industry. The White House's official report characterized the U.S.'s reliance on imported copper as an unsustainable dependence, signaling a policy of aggressive protectionism. One of the companies most vulnerable to any future tariffs is Glencore plc, a global mining and trading giant with a massive footprint in Canada. Glencore operates the Kidd Creek mine in Ontario and holds a near monopoly on Canadian copper smelting and refining through its Horn facility and Canadian copper refinery in Quebec. The company has so far remained cautious in its public statements, with a spokesperson noting that they are reviewing the decision and what this means for our Canadian copper business. This measured response underscores the high stakes and uncertain nature of the current North American trade landscape, where a single policy decision can have profound and lasting effects on a company's bottom line. The new copper tariffs, while seemingly sparing Canada for now, serve as a stark reminder of the fragile balance of power in international trade. The new tariffs, while not directly impacting the majority of Canadian copper exports, are part of a larger, more aggressive trade policy from the Trump administration. The U.S. has been increasingly using Section 232 investigations, which are based on national security concerns, to impose tariffs on a variety of goods. This approach sidesteps traditional trade dispute mechanisms and puts pressure on trading partners like Canada to renegotiate trade agreements on U.S. terms. The timing of the copper tariffs, just as a deadline for a trade deal with Canada approaches, highlights the strategic use of these measures as a negotiating tool. For the Canadian economy, the direct effects of the copper tariffs on the mining sector are minimal, but the indirect effects on downstream industries like wire and cable manufacturing are a major concern. The potential for a significant drop in U.S. demand for these products could lead to reduced production and job losses in Canada. Furthermore, the threat of future tariffs on refined copper creates a long-term risk that could discourage investment in Canada's refining capacity. This could have a chilling effect on the industry's ability to grow and innovate, as it faces the possibility of being locked out of its largest market. The situation also raises questions about the future of global supply chains. The U.S. is signaling a clear shift towards prioritizing domestic production and reducing its reliance on foreign sources, even from close allies. This could lead to a fragmentation of global supply chains, as companies are forced to choose between operating in the U.S. and facing tariffs, or moving their production to other countries. This could have a ripple effect on the global economy, as it could lead to a less efficient allocation of resources and higher prices for consumers. In a broader sense, these tariffs are not just about copper. They are a political statement about the U.S. administration's America First trade philosophy. They demonstrate a willingness to use economic tools to achieve political and strategic goals, even at the risk of alienating key allies. The Canadian government, caught in the middle of this escalating trade war, is in a difficult position. Prime Minister Mark Carney and his administration have signaled a desire for a bilateral agreement to ease the pressure from tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos, but the passing of a recent deadline without a resolution indicates the complexity of the negotiations. The Canadian government's response has been a mix of retaliatory measures and efforts to diversify trade, but the sheer size of the U.S. market makes it an almost impossible partner to replace. This dynamic creates a climate of uncertainty that affects not only copper but a host of other industries, leaving Canadian businesses in a waiting game until the likely Supreme Court case on the legality of some tariffs is decided. The economic and diplomatic fallout from these tariffs extends beyond the immediate trade figures. The move has been criticized by various Canadian industry groups, including the United Steelworkers Union, which warned that the tariffs drive up costs, disrupt supply chains, and hurt workers on both sides of the border. They argue that the tariffs undermine North American manufacturing and economic security by creating unnecessary friction in a deeply integrated supply chain. The U.S. itself is not immune to the negative consequences. Analysts have pointed out that the tariffs could lead to higher costs for American defense contractors and infrastructure projects that rely on copper inputs. The move also risks reducing the global competitiveness of U.S. exporters who use copper in their products. Furthermore, the diplomatic friction created by the tariffs could weaken alliances and cooperation on other issues. Ultimately, the copper tariffs are a reflection of a fundamental shift in U.S. trade policy. The administration is no longer a staunch advocate for free trade but is instead using tariffs as a tool to pursue a more protectionist agenda. This shift has created a climate of unpredictability that makes it difficult for businesses to plan and invest, both in the U.S. and abroad. For Canada, This means navigating a new and challenging trade environment, where even close allies are not safe from the threat of tariffs. The long-term consequences of this shift are still unclear, but they could include a permanent reordering of global supply chains, a decline in North American economic integration, and a weakening of the traditional US-Canada